Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our first session of a year-long series of professional development workshops for family and consumer science teachers and hopefully many others. And I think some people are still joining, and we'll kind of wait for some folks to come on here. But as you enter, if you can just share in the comments your name and where you're teaching, that would be wonderful, just so we know who we're visiting with. And as a note, this video will be watched later by many teachers who have signed up and are hoping to watch it at a later time. The same link that you received to watch live is a link that you can share and watch at a later time. So please watch again or share with others that you think you might find this interesting. Okay, so let me introduce myself and introduce the program. I'm Jen Rothman, for those of you who have not met me before. I'm the director of the Yellow Farmhouse Education Center. We are located in Stonington, Connecticut, and our mission is to connect people to each other and to where their food comes from through food and farm-based education. We have been doing professional development for family and consumer science teachers for the last several years. And we just received some wonderful funding from the Connecticut State Department of Education through their Connecticut Grown for Connecticut Kids grant to allow us to run these programs for the entire year. So we will be running monthly virtual programs and several in-person workshops, all which can be viewed on our website at www.yellowfarmhouse.org. And I'm going to put that up here now. Give me 1 second. All of the programs are listed on our website, and we will also be housing previously recorded videos there, as well as resources. So this is our website, www.yellowfarmhouse.org. So please visit us there. So as I mentioned, these sessions are funded by the Connecticut Grown for Connecticut Kids grant, and we were also recently funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture through their Farm to School program. And with that funding, we will be, over the course of the year, building a website that houses videos, resources, lesson plans, all to support family and consumer science culinary teachers. So we look forward to sharing more about that with you. Later in the program, we'll be joined by Sarah Edlin, who's an educator here as well. But I want to start by just getting a chance to think about what autumn means to us. So this session is called Seasonal Cooking Autumn. And we want to start by just thinking about what autumn means to us. And we're going to be using a tool called Mentimeter. So I'm not sure if any of you out there have used it. If you have, please share in the comments. But also, if you're just joining us, go ahead and post where you're watching from and what you teach, and introduce yourself if you'd like. What I'd like everybody to do is to go to menti.com, which is a website, and you're going to enter the code that's listed on the screen, 4845075. And I will be sharing my screen in just a moment. And what we'll be seeing, I'll actually start to share now, are some words that come in that will automatically create a word cloud with the words that you've entered that make you think about autumn. So let me share that now. And in the meantime, I hope some of you are starting to enter those in. I'll be entering mine as well. Here we go. Okay, so that should be up on the screen now. There we go. So there's nothing on there now because I've not started to share the view, and let me do that as well. We'll start to see what words we associate with autumn. Okay, so we have a few coming in, and we'll give it a few more minutes for everybody to be entering their words. I'm going to do mine also. So I see apples, I see fall, crisp, I see pumpkins. I just kicked myself out, so I'm going to put in a few more for myself. And you can enter up to 6 of them. I like this tool because it gives something for students to do while you're presenting a slide. It was used for a demonstration that I was part of this summer, And I found it really useful. In this presentation that this presenter was sharing, it was voting. And so in addition to word clouds, you can also utilize this for voting. You can create bar graphs or just open-ended questions. So it's a great way to receive feedback from students without without raising hands, and just to get the conversation going. And it's a great way maybe to have students who don't feel comfortable saying something out loud to still be able to share something. So Thanksgiving, apples, pumpkins, leaves, fresh air, fall, brilliant colors, crisp hay rides. These are all great words. And so this will continue, and maybe I'll come back to this as the session goes on. I'm going to stop sharing now for a moment. Okay. And I'll take off the banner and we'll come back to it. So those words can continue to get added. And we have another slide that we'll share a little bit later on. So those ideas of understanding what the season is before we even start to think about what we might cook in the season. So we're going to be thinking about, oh, hi, Pat, I see you there from Stanford. Welcome. We're going to be thinking about the way that the air feels, and maybe celebrations that take place in that season. Maybe we're already starting to think about ingredients. But what I wanted to kind of get to in this session was about the way that we need to understand nature and to be connected to nature before we even start to think about the season and what we might cook in that season. There's a saying that goes, the most direct connection we have with nature is food, which we have every day. Because every time we eat something, it connects us to nature in some ways. Hi, Deborah, welcome. So the culinary classroom is such an obvious time to be thinking about the natural world. And when we're thinking about cooking and food as a way to understand better how we can make ourselves healthy, but how we can also make our planet healthy and our communities healthy, it has to start with understanding our place in nature and understanding the natural world. So I think that the culinary classroom is a great chance to get outdoors, to start thinking about our connection to nature as a mindset, to then be thinking about how that influences what and how we cook. I'm curious if any of you teachers take your students outdoors, and if that's part of your classroom or your curriculum. So the other thought we had as we were developing these programs, and again, this is the first of many, is to be able to share resources. So the Mentimeter, for example, is a great tool to use for this session, but also maybe something that you might use in your classroom. I also want to be able to share resources that will be helpful for you, but also might just be something that you can plug right into your classroom as well. And it's with that in mind that we chose this next resource, which is a video. It's short, or the part that we're showing is short, about 9 minutes. It's a video about Edna Lewis. If anybody knows of her, please shout that out in our comments as well. Oh, and I see Pat goes out to an herb garden. Yeah, a school garden is such an obvious way, and I hope many schools have gardens that the culinary classroom utilizes and visits. So Ms. Lewis was an early champion of Southern cookery. She helped to educate and mentor generations of chefs and food enthusiasts while celebrating African-American culinary community and culture. I pulled her introduction from her foundation, the Edna Lewis Foundation, which I just put the website up here, and it's a good starting place to learn more about her. She was the author of 3 cookbooks, which the New York Times said in 2006 revived the nearly forgotten genre of refined Southern cooking while offering a glimpse into African-American farm life in the early 20th century. Her cookbooks include the Edna Lewis Cookbook, The Taste of Country Cooking, and In Pursuit of Flavor. The video that I'll show shares a little bit more about her and her life. So I'll kind of stop there. But I think the way that she, and in this video, her sister and her niece talk about seasonality is a really great starting point for us to have a conversation. So I'm going to share the video, and then we'll revisit and have a conversation in the comments. Okay, I'm pulling it up now. It's called In the Season, And we'll watch about 9 minutes of the documentary, which is a little bit longer than that.
This week we've been having beans and squash at the garden, and they're the best I've ever tasted. And I said to my sister, you know, in the city you put a lot of spices and herbs on food, but you really don't need it. I don't think people even realize that. Food is so good out here.
This is the story of a remarkable woman who wrote a cookbook back in 1976 that put American Southern cooking on the international culinary map. Her name is Edna Lewis, and the book she wrote is not just a list of recipes, but a celebration of a simpler and purer way of life, where everything revolved around the preparation of local, healthy, fresh, flavorful food that was picked in the season.
Spring would bring our first and just about only fish, shad. It would always be served for breakfast, soaked in salt water for an hour or so, rolled in seasoned cornmeal, and fried carefully in home-rendered lard with a slice of smoked shoulder for added flavor. There were crispy fried white potatoes, fried onions, batter bread, any food left over from supper, blackberry jelly, delicious hot coffee, and cocoa for the children.
Edna Lewis's story is told by her niece, Nina Williams Mbenge, and Edna's sister, Ruth Lewis Smith.
It was always fun to go searching for nuts and berries, to have the men bring in some game in the fall or the first fish of spring, all of which not only added to our regular supply of food, but always brought something festive to the table.
The Edna Lewis story is also told by her friend and fellow cook, Chef Joe Randall, who continues to carry her torch by establishing the Edna Lewis Foundation.
Because she was the queen, the grand dame of Southern cooking, and still is, in my opinion. You know, nobody's taking it from her.
And the story is told from a series of interviews recorded in the summer of 1984, when Edna herself described growing up in the rural community of Freetown in Orange County, Virginia. This is where she was born, and to understand her, we must go back to her rural roots and her first childhood memories of making mud pies and chasing fireflies.
I guess the earliest thing were the baby chickens that were given us, and we had to feed them. And they came to a point where they had to be killed, and we didn't, maybe, I don't think we even complained about it, because we knew that these things had to be killed so you could eat.
Freetown was an idyllic community of 11 families where everyone got along, everyone pulled his or her share, and everyone helped everyone else.
If you didn't have any butter, say some people's cow would dry up, and my mother would give them a pound of butter. They returned it. They would return 2 pounds. If you borrowed a cup of sugar, they would return 2 cups. If someone was ill, fell ill, if my aunt and uncle had the flu, then the neighbors would go in and milk the cows and feed the chickens and clean the house and cook the food and come at night and sit up with you if someone was sick. It was great. I never met any people like them. I guess rural life was more conducive to that kind of life because you had to have someone help you get up your hay. You didn't hire anyone. You cooperated with your neighbors. They used your tools and you used theirs.
Freetown was founded by her grandfather, an emancipated slave, who, although illiterate himself, recognized the value of education by making his living room available as the community's first school.
The first thing they knew that children had to be educated, and that's what they set out to do.
And her grandfather helped establish Bethel Baptist Church, just up the road from Freetown. Throughout her life, she and other members of her family who had moved away would come back, always in August, for revival. a week-long celebration of feasting, faith, and family at the height of the growing season.
Father God of mercy, what did thine only Son endure before we drew our breath? What pain and labor to secure our souls from endless death?
My father would drive straight up to one of the long tables that were stretched out in a line under the huge shady oak trees alongside the church. My mother would spread out a white linen tablecloth before setting out the baked ham, the half dozen or more chickens she had fried, a large baking pan of her light, delicate corn pudding, a casserole of sweet potatoes, fresh green beans flavored with crisp bits of pork, and biscuits that had been baked at the last minute and were still warm.
It was here in Freetown that Edna Lewis developed her love of locally grown, pesticide and preservative-free food, long before such phrases as grow local, eat local, and earth to table had become so popular.
When you talk about country cooking and you talk about eating out the country, well, what is the country that means rural? Well, the entire South primarily was dealing with the rural part of the country. And so when we talk about Southern food, we're talking about food that is either grown, either trapped, shot, or hunted for, or caught on the line. But it wasn't about running to the supermarket. If you had a loaf of bread, somebody had to take the time to make it.
Edna Lewis disdained modern conveniences such as food processors and the like, wouldn't touch chemically preserved food, said that convection ovens ruin pastry. She even turned up her nose at freezers, adding we rely on refrigeration far too much.
Down home, we had a spring at the foot of the hill, and that's where we kept perishable food. You didn't have no ice. You had it ice later on, but you didn't have an ice box.
And she distrusted hybrid seeds, saying they produce vegetables that look good, travel well, but taste like cardboard.
And she complained that the food doesn't have the same texture and quality now. It's become hybridized. It doesn't need to cook as long, but that's why you had that long cooking of those greens. And when you overcook it now, they're just that, they're overcooked because they're hybridized, they're softer, they don't have as much fiber. And she complained about that. She thought the food probably had was more nutritious. And if it's organic, it's got to be more nutritious. And to prepare the foods with as many natural products and ingredients as possible. I always felt that, being in Virginia in the summer, listening to Aunt Edna, that the folks were healthier because they were doing more physical work, and the food was always fresh from the garden. All the time, it had just been picked that day. Even the animals, they raised them themselves. They hadn't used any chemicals, to feed the pigs or the hogs or the chickens and the turkeys and geese and ducks and things like that. And they were running around what they called now free range. They were just, they were running around the yard and the woods, and they tasted different and they tasted better. And the eggs tasted different. They looked different. And I think that affected all the food and made it taste so much richer and so much more delicious.
We would learn something now if we could go back and raise everything we ate, because you wouldn't have all this cancer.
You eat food that's, in the season. And then, of course, that means it's fresh. It's not, it's not been transported or stored or frozen or filled up with chemicals to make it last, but it's, prepared fresh. You get all the nutrients and all the flavor, too.
And it should be that way now, although there is spring in Chile and New Zealand, but by the time it gets here, it lost some of its savor.
When Edna
Okay. Stopping there, although the video itself is about 25 minutes, and was just hoping we could spend a few minutes chatting about sort of reaction. I watched that and I took some notes, and I think when we often talk about seasonality in the classroom, it almost always goes directly to the environmental connection. Of course, that is a big part of it. But what I hear also in that video is that seasonality is also connected to community, a way of life, culture. I hear about food memories, about the way that we remember our family through our food. So things like the white linen table and the softness of the corn and the just baked biscuits. So here we have a comment from Pat. You know, it reminded me of my grandmother who lived until 98 and ate out of her garden. Right, this was a different way of life, and some of it born out of necessity. Without things like refrigeration, you needed to use food right away or find ways to preserve it or can it or store it in a root cellar. That was another thing that was mentioned, is the refrigeration. Thank you, Pat, for sharing that, by the way. It reminds me a little bit of my grandmother as well, which she used a lot of canned foods, but she also always made seasonal dishes. And I just remember going to her house on Sunday nights and having a dinner with her. That was always different depending on the season that we visited. So there's an emotional connection to seasonality often. It also talked about neighbors, that sometimes we need to rely on our neighbors because we might not have the butter that we need, but that somebody else might have butter, and then we return twice the amount that we started with. Also feasting and celebration. Of course, seasons will help us think about the celebrations that we have. I found it interesting also to hear about the hybridization, which is something that we'll touch on in later sessions, about seed breeding. So much of the breeding that's happened is to increase shelf life. And so when there's actually an example of seed breeding that is not so much for shelf life actually, but for packaging. So seed breeding is often done for reasons other than flavor and taste and nutrition. It's done to accommodate modern conveniences like packaging and freezing and shelf life and grocery stores and food miles. So one of the examples I like to talk about there's two examples, but one of them I'll start with is green beans. So snap peas, for example, they typically curl, right? Like you'll get a snap pea and they might have a little curl to it, and there's that little string that you can peel off before you eat it, either fresh or cook it. That string, if it's really thick, will increase the curl of that pea. And so seed breeders have started to breed the curl out of the pea so that it's flatter and so that it can be packaged easier, so that you can fit more of them in a package and ship it off. Well, the interesting thing is that the genes that are associated with that curl and the thickness of that curl are also associated with sweetness. So when you breed for flatness, one of the results that you have from it is also less sweet. And so our flavor is very much impacted by the breeding that's done for traits other than flavor. Another example is tomatoes. There's certain tomatoes where the top is green when the tomato is very ripe. And the machines that harvest tomatoes will detect color and will harvest because it's red. And of course, so many people want just the perfect red tomato, and that green might make it seem like it's not quite ripe. But on this tomato, on this particular variety, the greenness shows that it is in fact ripe. Well, when you breed that top color out, which was done so that the detectors that detect the tomato ripeness, so that the harvest can happen electronically, the green was bred out so that it was just all red. And the same gene that is associated with the greenness on the top of that tomato is also associated with sweetness and flavor. So when you breed out the color green for a machine to be able to see the tomato, you're actually breeding out some of the flavor as well. So they're exactly right that when you breed for shorter cooking time, it's less fiber, it's not going to have as much nutrition. So it does lead, I think seasonality can lead to a conversation about seed breeding and the ethics and the intentions behind breeding. But as we started with, it can also talk about community and neighbors and food memories. The other thing that they talk about too is just like a direct connection with nature. And so I wanted to share two more resources that might be of use. They mentioned shad in the first part. And sorry, that was one other thing I thought I would mention, is that we often think of seasonality only as it relates to vegetables, but there's also a seasonality with the fish that we might purchase, from local fishermen, and there's a seasonality with certain meats. And so she talked about spring and shad. Does anybody who's watching, have you heard of the shad bush? It's a native to this region. And this is a book called When the Shad Bush Blooms. And you may have heard of another ingredient, like she said in there, shad, the fish. Well, the shad bush is so named because typically when the shad bush blooms is the same time that the shad are running in the rivers. So when you saw the bloom, you would also know, oh, I guess it's time to go catch fish. And so much of our disconnect with nature just disconnects us from understanding what is available and what's ready for us. So when we lose that connection, it's very easy, I think, to lose a general understanding of how we might choose our foods based on the season. So I thought I would read this book. So this is When the Shad Bush Blooms. It's written by Carla Messenger, and we'll put that in the comments as well for you in a moment. And I'll read just a couple of sections. So I'll start with this page. In early spring, when the shad bush blooms like a white lace veil, we go fishing. Dad smiles when my brother or I catch a shad. We roast the fish, and everyone enjoys it, especially the dog. And what I like about this book is that it's a good way to sort of mine for or look for the visual and sensory clues that tell us that it's a certain season. So here I hear about when the shad bush blooms and the dog being out in the pond. And I'm going to read another page here from another season. So that's for the spring. And so here's the picture of the other page that I'm about to read. And it says, when the air hums with the wings of bees, my brother and I chase the crows from our garden. Together we gather honey. My brother ducks when a bee buzzes too close. I lick from one finger a drop as sweet as summer. And so here we hear the sounds of the hummings of bees and the crows. Like when we start to hear crows, we start to know like, oh, it's fall is coming again. But sometimes I think those cues are missing from us. And here's one that says, I'll read it first and then I'll show the page. When tall stalks rustle and the ears of corn have grown fat, we roast corn with our friends. While Grandma carefully takes her corn off the cob, I gobble mine fast. The baby plays with the new doll, and my brother scores a goal for his team. And I love this page because, oftentimes when we have these conversations in our classroom about seasons, it's always about the air and the pumpkins and the apples, but it's also about the sports. I know for me, when fall season comes, it means I get to be outside watching my kids play soccer. So I love that it includes those kinds of cues as well. It's the start of school. It's when soccer starts. It's when I start wearing jeans. I get to wear my favorite sweater. There's also things that are outside of the natural or sort of food world. And then one final one. When grasshoppers patter in the fields and the evenings echo with insect songs, we can enjoy the autumn harvest. Mom finds a pumpkin so big she can hardly carry it. Grandma shows a baby a beautiful gourd, and my brother and I catch grasshoppers. So just another example of the way that this story it engages our senses to think about the different ways the seasons hit us. Okay. The other book I want to share is Tomie dePaola's Strega Nona's Harvest. I like this also just because it talks about the different seasons that take you to the final harvest. It's a longer story, but I just want to share a few pages. So this one says, Children Come, called Strega Nona. It's almost the end of Maggio, May, and there will be a full moon tonight. It's time to plant. And she goes on to say, let me put that page up first. I always do this the wrong way. Hold on. It's this way. So she sees the month of May and the full moon. And so I mentioned this book also because it talks about the cycles of the moon and understanding, again, not just the season, but also the time of the month that it is. So at the full moon is when we want to plant our seeds and harvest. This is tradition that goes back generations, but even many of modern farmers have sort of forgotten these connections to the natural cycle. So here's just a beautiful picture about the harvest and the seeds that they're planting. That night, when the full moon rose in the sky, Stregonona quietly crept out to the garden. She looked up at the moon and sang, "O bella luna, smile at me and on the seeds I sow, and let the moonbeams shine from thee to make my garden grow." And now for the ingrediente segreto, secret ingredient. Stregonona blew 3 kisses to the moon. So it shares also sort of a respect and sort of admiration and appreciation for what nature brings us. So I again bring these up to share resources that will help us connect seasonality to nature. And now we are going to head out to the farm stand to visit with educator Sarah Edlin. And while we're out there, she's going to walk us through what is available in the farm stand. And the conversation here, as she shows us the different vegetables. Now, this is at this farm in particular, which is Stone Acres Farm. Stone Acres Farm is the farm where the Yellow Farmhouse is located, and we grow vegetables out on about 8 or 9 acres, and we also raise chickens for eggs and meat. And as she's walking us through, one of the things I hoped we could do is share through that Mentimeter the ways you use these vegetables in the classroom. Because one of the things I hope that these sessions do is just to spark ideas about potentially new ways to utilize ingredients in your classrooms. And one of the things that we offer here at Stone Acres Farm is something called a CSA. You may have heard of a CSA, Community Supported Agriculture. I'm going to just type this into the banner so that you can see it. But again, it's probably something you may have heard before. But community supported agriculture is essentially where customers of a farm will purchase a full season of vegetables. And they do that usually in January, February, right around the time where there's not a lot of food coming off the farm. And so the farms need money to be able to buy seeds, to prep their fields, to fix the equipment that broke in the harvest season. And so supporting a farm through a CSA by paying upfront, it's giving them sort of the financial capital that they need to get to the summer. And then over the summer, you either get a bag of produce that's pre-put together for you, or you get a credit at a farm to purchase, to take your share. For example, I purchased a $20 a week share this summer, and every week during the CSA, which was 8 weeks long, I went to the farm stand and I picked out $20 worth of vegetables that I took home. I had already paid for it in the winter. And when you participate in something like a CSA, you're changing your mindset a little. Instead of going into a farm stand and saying, what do I want to cook today? You're saying, let me let the farmer, and in turn, the soil and the health of the soil, tell me what I'm going to cook today. Because when you choose what a farmer is growing, if they're growing in a way that's supporting healthy soil, then you're letting the farm tell you what they need to support that soil. So seasonal eating in that way directly impacts the farm's ability and the farmer's ability to protect and regenerate their soil. So let me welcome Sarah. But before I do that, I want to reshare the Mentimeter. I'm going to share my screen now so I can show you the question. And here is the seasonality one. So we see this, and this will continue to add to this. And I'm going to skip to the next slide that says, what are your go-to recipes for these fall vegetables? We had one of our educators already share eggplant parmesan. So there's a little teaser that we're going to see some eggplant, so you can start getting your eggplant ideas ready. But this is what we're going to show, and you should now. I'm going to check on my phone to make sure it did the same thing. Yep, we can start submitting. And I think you can submit multiple answers here. So go ahead and start submitting answers as Sarah shows us what is available. Let me take myself out of the full screen. I'm going to remove this for now, and I'm going to welcome Sarah to the screen. Hi, Sarah. Oh, we need to unmute you. Let me see if I can do it. I think you're going to have to unmute.
Okay, I think I did.
Yeah, you're all set. So you are out there at the farm stand.
I'm at the farm stand. here on Stone Acres Farm, and let's go in.
Great. So I'm going to put you on full screen. I'll be in the background. So if you have any questions or anybody has any questions for me, I can speak up, but I'll make it so that we can just see your screen.
All right. So this is the Stone Acres Farm stand. And I'll try to give you a fuller picture of it. You can see it's full of produce right now, and let's look and see what's here so we can decide what we're going to make for dinner tonight. So the good news is, on this table as we first come in, sorry, I'm trying to figure out, we've got peppers, tomatoes, another kind of pepper, and garlic. So if nothing else, we can go home and make a really nice ratatouille, assuming that when we come over here, we can get some eggplant. And sure enough, there it is. Sorry. So here we've got tomatoes and eggplant. So now we can certainly go home and make a delicious ratatouille. But we might also want to do something simpler, like slicing eggplant, baking it, and just sprinkling it with a little feta cheese, or slicing and baking it and putting it in the oven with a little mozzarella. Okay, so here we've got squash, we've got butternut and delicata. Both of those would make a really nice soup. You can also slice delicata and saute them with a little garlic and onions. We do have onions here in the farm stand right now, so that would definitely be an option. We've also got these really beautiful little fairy tale eggplant, which the farm grew for the first time this summer, and they're just so beautiful. It feels a shame to chop them up. You can slice these long and put them in the oven for just a little bit, and then make a tahini sauce or any sort of sauce for just dipping. And then there's lots and lots of peppers. Red, yellow, bell peppers. We've got cayenne peppers, shishito peppers. Lately, I've noticed that almost every restaurant I go to is serving blistered shishito peppers with some kind of spicy sauce, and I order it every time I see it. So let's see what else we've got. We've got a refrigerated section just to keep these a little bit longer. Everything here came in out of the fields in the last day or two, so some of these things will last a little bit longer. We have some green beans. I think these are just coming in, and when I see green beans, I always think, are there potatoes? And there are. So then we can make what's the word I'm looking for? A potato, green beans with some curry spices for a nice sort of Indian curry dish. So that's sort of the produce that I'm seeing here today. While I'm here, I would definitely get myself some flowers, which are coming out of the garden, and we've got some corn. It's the end of corn season, so I'm going to eat as much corn as I can until we run out. So that's what we've got here in this farm stand in the way of vegetables being grown on the farm. Can I send it back to you, Jen, or does anyone have any questions?
Absolutely. And so I've got the Mentimeter going. And so I've asked everybody to post in the question, it is, what are the ways that your go-to recipes? And one of the things that we will do, because again, there will be people who are going to be watching this at a later time. And so when, as this goes along, we'll start to just make lists of like the ways that people use fall produce in their classroom or at home. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'll add it to the stream. I don't know if everybody can read that. It might be a little bit small, depending on what screen. But there was the eggplant parmesan recipe. I've been making a recipe recently where I'm not frying the eggplant. It's just a baked eggplant, meaning that I slice and bake them and then layer them with sauce and some Parmesan cheese, and it's really lovely. I saw the eggplant and the caramelized or the onions. And I've also been making a dip with roasted eggplant and caramelized onion. It's like a little bit like a baba ganoush. All of those peppers I've started to stuff with cheese. And I've been making a baked popper. So just a little bit different than a jalapeno popper or a pepper popper, and just taking the peppers and having them and then filling them with a mixture of cream cheese and Parmesan and mozzarella cheese and some garlic. And those have been really amazing and quick snacks. But it's also something that some kids might be familiar with. What else is on there? Oh, potato pancakes is such a wonderful thing, especially if you have apples also, which leads us into our next conversations. But potato pancakes is a really wonderful recipe to do in the classroom, because it does incorporate a lot of different methods, including grating and peeling, and of course, eggs, and then making them into the patties to fry and maybe top with some applesauce. So great. Thank you, Sarah. I think you're going to be heading inside in a moment. Please, everybody, continue to share on the Mentimeter. I'm going to remove that for now. And Sarah, I'll take you off this screen so you can join me in the kitchen. And everybody may have noticed that I'm in a new location. So I'm going to take Sarah out of the screen. I'm going to remove the Mentimeter, and I'm going to begin our demonstration. So I'm going to just close the door behind me. Give me one moment. Okay. So you'll start to see behind me that we have a series of apples. This is one of my favorite classes to do with students. We've done this with little kids and grown-ups, and it's an apple tasting. I'm sure you've done tastings in your classroom, but I love this. I love this activity at this time of the year because it allows us to do a lot of things in the fall. Hey, Sarah.
Hi.
And so behind me, I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different types of apples. These were all purchased yesterday from Holmberg Orchards, which is, gosh, do you remember what town? It's in Gales Ferry, I believe, right?
Ledger, yeah.
Gales Ferry, Connecticut. But I'm sure there's an apple orchard in Stamford. Maybe if you have it, you can share it in the comments for us so that you can share. But it's really wonderful to go to an orchard, both to just support a local farm, but also to see all of the variety, because usually they'll have a greater variety than the grocery store. And when I do an apple observation, the first thing that I typically do is I will have students just use their sense of sight to visually sort of rate and describe the apples. So I like this as an introductory activity early in the school year to start to build the vocabulary that students will use to describe the food, because it often goes to like, ew, or it's sweet, or it's salty, and those really sort of typical words. So this is a great way to start building that vocabulary. And often when I'm running a series of classes together, I will just kind of like start whether it's a sheet on the board or on the wall of just words to describe food, because there are so many, but sometimes we have a hard time accessing them. So what I will do is I'm going to bring you guys over to my apple so that you can see all of the apples that we have here. That's quite a variety. And what I would do is I would start by putting an apple on each board. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put an apple on each board, and I won't put the names of the apples. For this activity, I will say that we keep them separate, the apples. We put them in separate bags when we buy them, and we make a little bit of a label to make sure that we know which apple it is, because one time I didn't do that, and I had a whole bunch of apples, and I had no idea which one it was, which is fine. But when later on people wanted to know which apples they actually really did like, we can know. So we put an apple on each table board, and we just start by assessing visually which apple appeals to us. For this activity, we've created a worksheet, which we'll share with you. I'm just going to share it here so that I can kind of show you what I'm using, and then we'll email it to you. So I will share my screen with a tab that says Apple Characteristics Worksheet. And here we go. And so you'll see that it has the variety name. Let me see if I can get rid of that little piece. Okay, the variety name, size, color, shape, and maybe another observation that a student might make. And so here you would maybe hold off for a moment on the variety name until you've gotten a chance to explore the words that would describe the observation. So here it's talking about size, color, shape. And so you might describe each one. So here we go. So first, apple. And I will stop sharing so I can come back to my StreamYard. Okay, so for example, this apple here. And Sarah, maybe you can help me as if we were doing this together. So I would look at this apple and I would say, well, it's yellowish green. Compared to the others, it's like small to medium, I would say.
Compared to this one.
Compared to that one. Yeah, it's a little bit taller than that one. That one's a little bit rounder and flatter. This one has spots on it.
Sort of one color.
Yep.
Mostly one color, whereas this one has a variety of colors.
Yeah, and it's a little bit sloped on the bottom.
It's definitely a different shape.
Yeah. And so these are all words that would describe shape and color and even how it feels.
And it's sort of a medium size.
Yeah,
Yes,
like this one's
so
very smooth. This one's a little bit bumpier. And so then we can start to identify what the variety names are here. And so when I look at these apples, we then can, after we've gone over the size and the shape and the color and any other characteristics, and we've written those down for each variety, then we can kind of move on to the rating. And so I'm going to share the second screen, which is going to be more about flavor. But here, so I'm going to actually hold off on sharing that and say that sometimes we'll have students just identify their favorite based on what it looks like. And so we'll do this together. We'll see how it works. I'm going to take you down the variety. So I'm going to kind of show you each one. So here we have Ginger Gold. And I'll put the names here. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see them. Probably not the way it's written, but that's a Ginger Gold. This one here is a Gala. This one here is called Blondie.
That's Macintosh.
Macintosh is this one here. I'll try to get a good view for you. This one is called a Somerset. A Honeycrisp. And finally, the Cortland. And so what I'll do is I'll ask students to think about, just based on the way it looks, which one they think they're going to like the most. So Sarah and I are going to do that. If you feel like you had a chance to kind of see it well enough to know, let us know which one you think you would like the most. So I'm going to go down one more time. Ginger Gold. This one here is called Gala. Blondie. Macintosh. Somerset is this one here. Honeycrisp. And finally, Cortland. So I have my favorite picked out just based on the way it looks. Sarah, do you have yours?
Well, yeah, I think so, at least for today.
All right, my vote goes for this one, which is the Gala. I like this one because it's smallish, and I typically don't like eating like a big apple. I like a smaller apple, but it also to me looks like it's going to be really crisp. Just, I don't know why, because of the shape and the color and maybe previous experience. That is the one I would pick last. That's so funny.
That is so funny.
Okay.
So this is the, wait, what is it? Oh, this is the Cortland. Can you see it? Which is sort of squat and very, very shiny, which today is appealing to me. And it also has this green top and red bottom, and something about the way the color is the color, I think, is what really draws me to this one. Yeah.
And so I find when we do this with students that they often love kind of getting into like teams of who picked which apple. And I will often do this also with jars that either I have them take a bean or sometimes a pom-pom, and I have them put it in the jar to vote so that they can do it quietly and they just vote on which one is their favorite just based on the visual cues. And then we just see which one has the most votes, which is interesting because a lot of how we purchase food is based on the aesthetic of it. Okay.
Oh, I have just one more idea. If you're working with younger children and you want to have them vote, you can do that. They can do it with their bodies moving around the room, which is nice because they're up and they're moving around.
And good for older students too.
Yeah.
Get up and move around. Okay, so the next thing we would do is to cut the apples into smaller pieces for tasting, making sure to still have the names of the apples. And so for Sarah and I, we don't have to cut them up into smaller pieces, but this is certainly a good activity to practice knife skills. So I think apples, tasting, knife skills, beginning of the year, beginning of the semester, it's kind of perfect. And so then we go through the tasting and we start to explore on that same document things like sweetness, tartness, crispness, texture. And first, just by describing. So we would taste each one and we would spend some time using words to describe each one through those descriptors, which would be, again, sweetness, tartness, crispness, texture. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll have students look at a thesaurus and just type in like synonyms of sweetness, because we can say sweet, but maybe they're all sweet. And so I pulled up, I haven't even looked at this, so let's see, different synonyms for sweetness. Let's see, here we go. Nope, that's not it. Give me 1 second to pull that off. I just have to close this piece. There was an ad. Okay, so delicious, luscious, syrupy, candied, candy-coated, cloying. I think cloying is a really good word. It's like almost overly sweet. It's sweet, but without a positive context. Honeyed, like candy. So we can do similes. Saccharine, which might be a little bit artificial tasting. So these are all ways that we can kind of come up with new words to describe a flavor. This summer, I visited a microgreens farm, and the farmer was growing microgreens of corn. He called them, I think he called them pop shoots or something like that, but they were just these like little bitty shoots of corn, and the flavor was so sweet and so like that saccharine flavor. And cloying was a great word to describe that. It was very saccharine, very sweet, almost artificial, even though it was there was nothing artificial about it. Okay, so we have our apples chopped, and I'm just going to come over here because I have our I'm going to turn off. Okay, so we have our apples chopped here, and why don't we start at this one and go down, and we'll do it quickly. So I apologize because I wish you were in the classroom. Maybe.
Yeah, by the time we get done.
Maybe. Although I'm glad that the first one and this one is delicious. This is the ginger gold. And it's very sweet. It has a little bit of that saccharine flavor at the end of it. And so we would take some notes. It's crispy, it's juicy, it's sweet, it's not very tart. It's a little watery.
Mm-hmm.
And moving on to the Gallo, which is the one that I thought I would like the most. It's definitely different. It's definitely less sweet and maybe a little bit more like nuanced in a way in terms of the flavor.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the Blondie. Ooh, that's really good. That one almost tastes like a pear, and it's not surprising because it just kind of looks like a pear, but it has that kind of pear flavor. It doesn't have the same texture as a pear at all, but it has like looks like a warmer flavor.
Right, not nearly as sweet.
Not as sweet. And so you sort of get the gist here that as you go along, it gets sometimes a little harder to describe because
They get more complex. Like the first one's sort of easy.
yeah, okay. I do not like that one. Which one is that one?
That's the Macintosh.
That's a Macintosh. It's a little bit mealy. It's not crisp. It's not super tart.
No.
But then we start to think about how we might use an apple in a different recipe. So that Macintosh, while it's not my favorite to eat raw like that, would be great for applesauce because it's going to break down super quick, and it would probably be really good in an apple pie where you don't want the apples to hold up. Like if you like apple pies with a really mushy filling, the Macintosh might be a good choice. But if you like apple pies where your apples stay intact and sliced, probably not a good choice. Okay.
Yeah, an interesting thing about Macintosh. So in the colonial period, there were about 14,000 varieties of apples in the United States. Now we really focus on about 90 varieties.
Okay.
But 50 years ago, the Macintosh was by far and away the most available variety. And then they started cultivating different varieties, and it's still a very popular apple, but it's nowhere near as or it's not what it was.
Right. And
the
the other apple that became very popular was the Red Delicious, which when I was growing up was the go-to apple of choice. It was the only apple you could really get. It's what was served at fast food restaurants, and it was what was served when it was available at the grocery store. And I think it's my middle son only eats Red Delicious, which is crazy to me because they don't really taste like anything. But there's something about the color and the shape. It just looks like what an apple should look like. And a lot of why that was chosen to be bred like that was exactly for that bright red color. So it was bred for the color, not so much for the flavor. It really is this sort of watered down apple. And apple breeders work pretty hard on getting apples bred for sale. And it's a big venture because there's a lot of time that goes into breeding to get a variety that people are going to really like. And then you have to change customer preference from something like the Red Delicious. Gala, I think, is one of the more popular apples now. And I think that's the next, we tried the Gala at the beginning.
This Somerset,
I liked it.
I like it fabulous.
That Somerset is really good. Okay, so this is the
Honeycrisp.
Honeycrisp is a really popular variety as well.
I think they had the Fuji came along, and then based on the popularity of the Fuji, they went to the Pink Lady
and the Honeycrisp. So the Honeycrisp is kind of a perfect apple, I'm not gonna lie. It's really good. And then finally the Cortland, which was Sarah's guess for her favorite based on the look.
That's not my favorite taste. I like it, but it's not my favorite.
And it's so funny because it's my second favorite. I thought I would hate that one, and it's actually my second favorite. The one I actually like the most is the Honeycrisp, which is not super surprising. But I really like the Honeycrisp, and I think I wouldn't have picked that based on the visual cues. And I certainly wouldn't have picked the, that's the Somerset?
The Somerset.
Oh, the Cortland. I wouldn't have picked the Cortland, but I really like it. It's a little bit grainy, or it almost feels like it has like a texture at the end that I don't love as much as I love the Honeycrisp. So that's another fun thing, is to see how the prediction of what they think they'll like just by looking at it changes after they taste something. It's a good way to remind students that just because they think they might not like something because of the way it looks or smells may not be the case if they try it. So maybe this is a good way also to encourage trying new foods, especially in a cooking class. Okay. If anybody has any questions, please post them. We will share this worksheet with you. We'll share it with you as a PDF, but I think we'll also be able to share it with you as a Google link so that you can copy the document and edit it however you'd like. If you wanted to change the parameters that you're judging. So what do we do with all these apples after we've chopped them? What we do is we make applesauce, and I'm sure you have all made applesauce. This is not a new thing. what I love about the way that this is the way my grandmother made applesauce. And so when I make this, I think of her. And I think she probably only used Red Delicious apples because her applesauce was always pink. And it's because we keep the skin on. So it's a really simple way to make applesauce. What I would love to hear, though, if there are ways that you adjust your applesauce, or there are particular seasonings. So I know everybody has like a little bit of a tweak that they do to their applesauce. Like maybe they add in raisins or something else to their applesauce. But what we do is as simple as chopping up the apples into pieces, and you can include the seeds and the stems and the roots. You can include all the parts, not the roots, but the base of it, and just chop it into even-sized pieces, and add it to a pot. So I'll bring you over to our stove, and we're just adding the apples to the pot with all the parts. And so maybe Sarah, if you want to continue to chop and add, it's a great way to, again, do an activity that you might that might be useful for teaching about, like I said, knife skills, language and vocabulary around food, trying new things, variety and seed breeding. And I should mention one of the ways, I didn't bring it in here, I left it in the other room before I moved in, but one of the ways that I like to talk about language also is using seed catalogs. Oh, thanks, Sarah. Seed catalogs are a great way to seek new words to describe foods, because seed sellers, people who sell seeds, need to describe the way that the food the seed grows into tastes or looks so that people will buy their food. So it's a marketing tool. And so, for example, this is Baker's Creek heirloom seeds. And if we look at, for example, this eggplant, I'm just picking one at random, so let's hope it has some good descriptive words. Lovely, bright purple stripes, sweet, tender flesh. So tender is a new word that we might not have talked about. Let's see. I'll pull up another one for us. Here, maybe these peppers. This has a nice description. You can also see all the different variety. Colorful, sunny, lemon, yellow. Prolific, so that would be how long it grows. Let's see. The sturdy plants are covered in sunny color. So these are more ornamental, I guess, but thick, flavorful, hot. And so they're great ways to find those words that we're looking for to help describe the food that we're eating. Seed catalogs we use all the time in our classes. I also use it to talk about variety, to have them, maybe if we don't have the apples or the, let's say the beets to taste in a classroom, we might ask them to just pick which beet they would grow given a certain parameter. So maybe we would say, you are a farmer who is asked by a chef to grow very small, delicious, brightly colored beets. And then we'll have them go through the seed catalog and find all of the beets that they might grow and pick the one that fit their parameters. Or maybe you're a beet grower who is needing to grow big beets that you can sell at a farmer's market for a lot of money, and it's based on the weight. So maybe we'll go through and see which beet is bred for size, and not for the color or the flavor. So those are the ways that we might use seed catalogs, some of the ways. Okay, so then we just add all of our apples that we had used for our tasting into a big pot. We add a little bit of water, maybe like 1/2 inch of water, just enough to cover the bottom, because the apples will release a lot of juices. I do then, as I'm cooking it, keep track of that water, because you don't want the apples to stick. So it's really so the apples don't stick to the bottom. I will add a little bit of lemon juice. We have some lemon juice that we made earlier, and so we might just do a teaspoon or so of lemon juice. Oops, sorry, I wasn't in the screen there. And then I'll add a cinnamon stick. If we have it, maybe I will add some allspice berries, maybe some cloves. You can kind of play around with the seasonings there. So I'm going to bring us over to a pot of applesauce that we had going earlier. This was made with all the different apples, and it really makes for a beautiful sauce. This has all the parts in it. And then all I'm going to do after that is bring the pot to, bring it back over here. Bring the pot over to a food mill. So this is a tool I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But it's a great one for students to practice on, which is just milling the food through that keeps the seeds and the skin and the stems in the strainer. And that gets the sauce nice and saucy without any lumps. I do sometimes just use a strainer and push it through with a spatula. And then once it's put through the food mill, we'll taste it for flavor, and it shouldn't require any sugar or addition there, but sometimes the apples aren't super sweet. It just sort of depends on what you have available. I'm gonna move this down a little bit. We're getting reconfigured with our kitchens here. So this will take a while. We won't go through the whole thing. Can you grab a spatula? And I don't think there's much better than the smell of apples cooking on the stove with cinnamon. There we go. We already have a whole bunch here, so I'll just do this much. It is kind of amazing, isn't it? And so we have our applesauce here. Oh, you know what we need are spoons. And it's so beautiful, and it's so smooth, and it's a beautiful side dish. And it's just, I think, one of the easiest things to make in the fall when there's plenty of apples. You're making it at home and you have kids who eat half of an apple, chop off the half that they ate, stick the other in the applesauce. Does it need any sugar?
I wouldn't. Mm-mm.
I don't think it needs anything.
No.
It's so sweet.
Fantastic.
It's so tart. It has such a depth of flavor because it uses all these different apples. I think leaving the skin adds a little bit of something.
Yeah,
And
it's amazing.
there you go. Applesauce. And so there you have it. That is the program for today. I welcome any questions anybody has, so I'll wait a few more moments. I'm going to go back to the meter and see we don't have any more additions to the fall recipes, but I am going to put this question out to our network and see if we can't get some additional recipes and just kind of find out the ways that you are all using ingredients in your classroom. I do hope this has been helpful. We would love to get your feedback because, like I said, this is the first of several programs. This was a seasonal demonstration. We have another seasonal demonstration in the winter and again in the spring. But the ones in between those are going to be interviews with local farmers. So for other direct connections for teachers to make to farming in Connecticut. So we will be speaking with dairy farmers, mushroom farmers, conversations about procurement and how we can source things locally, conversations with kelp farmers. And so a lot of the other sessions will be more interview-based and a little bit more conversation-based. And then those will be interspersed with these seasonal demos. We also have in-person programs this fall in October, November, and then again in the spring. So please visit our website. I'm going to share that here with you. I'm going to share our Instagram, which is a great way to kind of keep in touch and find out what's coming up. So at Yellow Farm CT is where you'll be able to find us on Instagram. If you have any questions for us, info@yellowfarmhouse.org. We have all of your contact information. So we will be sending out resources for this session, including the worksheet, which you can edit and use however you'd like it. As a reminder, Mentimeter is the tool. Sorry, that's menti.com. This is the one I meant to share. This was the code for today. So if anybody going forward who's watching this at a later time wants to add to the question, which is, what words do you think of in autumn that remind you of autumn? And then the second question is how you use the ingredients like squash and peppers and tomatoes and corn in your classroom. And if you would all be so kind to complete a survey for us, I'm going to put this in the chat as well so that it's easy for you to, because it's not going to be easy for you to link from here. So let me hide this and I will see if I can't, give me 1 second. I'm going to copy it and put it in the comment section for you. So I'm going to copy the, there we go. Okay, so the link to the form is there, but we'll also email that out to everybody. We would love to get your feedback. It's going to help us make adjustments to future presentations so that they more are fitting with what you need for your classroom. Please share ideas and suggestions and what you want, because this funding that we received is for us to provide professional development and also to develop this resource for all of you. And we want to make sure it's what you actually need. So we welcome and look forward to your feedback. Did I miss anything else, Sarah? Is that good? I don't think so. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We will see you soon. I hope your school year is off to a wonderful start and that your students are enjoying all of the wonderful things that you're doing in your classroom. And we really, really appreciate you joining us. So thank you.